I recently sat down with a data center architect who spent the entire lunch staring at his glass of ice water as it melted. He told me he'd just come from a meeting in DC where a group of regulators spent 3 hours discussing the thermal impact of a proposed AI cluster on a local trout stream. He laughed, but it was a dry, frustrated sound. "We're trying to build the future," he said, "but we're being held hostage by a river and a stack of impact assessments." To him, the walls weren't just metaphorical, they were physical. He felt the heat, literally, of a civilization that had run out of room to grow. Then he pulled up a render of a Starship payload bay on his tablet. His whole demeanor changed. The frustration vanished, replaced by this intense, almost clinical focus. He started sketching out how a vacuum doesn't need fans, just radiator panels shedding terawatts into the 3K background of space. He didn't call it space exploration, he called it the end of the thermal paradox. He told me that for the first time in history, the gravity well of bureaucracy and the hard limits of earthbound physics were about to be bypassed in a single move. That conversation stayed with me. It made me realize that the merger between SpaceX and xAI isn't really about satellites or chatbots. It is a declaration that the Earth has become a bottleneck for intelligence. We are witnessing the moment where the bootloader of human biology decides it's time to move the OS into orbit, and the math suggests that once we leave the atmosphere, the speed of our evolution isn't just going to increase, it's going to reach escape velocity. You know, that image, the glass of ice water, that's really stuck with me.
It's a powerful metaphor, isn't it?
It is. Because it's so mundane, just ice melting. But for him, it was like watching a timer count down on our entire planet-bound civilization. It completely reframed this whole conversation for me.
So?
Well, usually when you and I talk about SpaceX or going to Mars, it's all wrapped up in this kind of romance of exploration, you know? It's about planting flags and new frontiers.
Where no man has gone before, that kind.
Exactly. But this conversation felt different. It wasn't about exploration. It felt like it was about escape.
It's a survival instinct, but it's not a biological survival instinct. It's computational.
It's like we are literally talking about moving the brain, the actual cortex of our civilization, off planet. Not as a cool side project, but because we've hit a wall down here. A real physical wall.
And a legal one.
And a legal one, right.
I think wall is the perfect word because you look at the major trends converging right now. And this is what we're seeing in the technical papers from places like Google and the analysis coming out around this orbital ascent concept.
Yeah.
It's all pointing to 3 massive pressure points.
Okay, what are they?
First, you have the thermodynamic limits. That's your architects melting ice water. We are physically running out of ways to cool these machines on Earth without, boiling the oceans.
Right.
Second, you have the collapse in launch costs. Starship just completely rewrites the economic equation of getting mass into orbit. And third, and this might be the most potent driver, is the geopolitical angle. This intense global desire for what's being called sovereign compute.
Sovereign compute. Unpack that for me a little.
It's the idea that a nation, or even a large corporation, needs to have its own computing infrastructure that no other power on Earth can switch off, or regulate, or tax, or spy on.
So it's about digital independence.
It's the ultimate independence. We're shifting from a world where geography was destiny, who has the oil fields, who controls the shipping lanes, to one where, really, physics is destiny. Who controls the high ground? And the high ground is now orbit.
Okay, let's really dig into that first point because I think it's the one most people miss.
The heat.
The thermal paradox.
I mean, I think most of us, when we see headlines about AI scaling up, we just think about the electricity bill. The problem is power, right? Well, you just need to build more nuclear reactors, more solar farms, and we're good.
Well, that's half the equation. Power is the input. But every single watt of that power you pump into a GPU to make it think, it doesn't just disappear. It becomes heat. Pretty much all of it, eventually. It's a fundamental law of thermodynamics. So if you build a 1 gigawatt data center, you have, for all intents and purposes, built a 1 gigawatt heater.
A 1 gigawatt heater. That's not a hairdryer. That's like a small volcano. It's a significant geological event in terms of thermal output. And all that heat has to be dumped somewhere. It has to go into the air or into a river or into the ocean. It was from a hardware engineer, someone on the front lines of this.
This is the bonfire in a glass jar story.
That's the one. He works at a cutting-edge cooling plant in Northern Europe. These are places that use the most advanced liquid immersion systems you can imagine.
So they're literally dunking the servers in fluid.
Literally dunking racks of processors in these specialized non-conductive fluids just to pull the heat away fast enough. But he said even with all that tech, he felt like he was trying to build a bonfire inside a glass jar.
That's such a claustrophobic image effect.
And it's physically accurate. He talked about this feeling of suffocation, hitting what he called a bureaucratic ceiling, where physics and local regulations just conspire to ground intelligence. He can't get the permits to use more river water. The local atmosphere can only absorb so much heat before it impacts the microclimate. He is physically constrained by the specific heat capacity of air and water on planet Earth.
So for him, something like Starship isn't just a cool rocket.
No. For him, it's a thermodynamic jailbreak. He has this vision of silicon finally being able to breathe in the absolute silence of the vacuum.
I'm breathing in a vacuum. This is the part that always confuses me. A vacuum is an insulator, isn't it? My coffee thermos has a vacuum layer to keep the heat in. So if you put a blazing hot AI server in the vacuum of space, wouldn't it just instantly overheat and cook itself?
That is the single most common and most intuitive misconception. And you're absolutely right about your thermos. A vacuum is a fantastic insulator against two forms of heat transfer, conduction and convection.
Right, touching something hot and air currents.
Exactly. Conduction is heat moving through direct contact. Convection is heat carried by a fluid, like air or water. Your thermos stops both of those cold. But there's a third way heat moves. Radiation.
Like infrared radiation.
Exactly like infrared, electromagnetic radiation. Everything that has a temperature above absolute zero is glowing. You are glowing in infrared right now. A hot stove glows. The sun glows in visible light. This is governed by a piece of physics called the Stefan-Boltzmann law.
Okay, I think I remember that from school. It has a T to the fourth power in it or something.
That's the one.
What?
The power you radiate is proportional to the fourth power of your absolute temperature. And that exponent, T to the fourth, is huge. It's incredibly powerful.
So what does that mean in practice?
On Earth, if your data center is at, say, 80 degrees Celsius and the air outside is 30 degrees Celsius, the temperature difference, the delta T, is only 50 degrees. It's a relatively shallow gradient. You have to work really hard using massive fans and pumps to force the heat from the hot thing into the warm thing.
You're pushing the heat uphill, essentially.
Yeah, you're fighting the atmosphere. But in space, what's the background temperature of deep space?
It's close to absolute zero, right?
It's about 3 Kelvin. So minus 270 degrees Celsius. It is, for our practical purposes, an infinite and perfect heat sink.
So now the temperature difference is enormous.
You have your 80 degrees Celsius chip, which is 353 Kelvin, looking out at a 3 Kelvin background. The heat isn't being pushed anymore. It is leaping into the void. It desperately wants to leave, radiating away as infrared photons.
So the bonfire in the glass jar becomes a bonfire in an open field on the coldest night in the history of the universe.
The night that is infinitely large and never ends. And if you engineer it correctly, and this is where the design comes in, you have these huge unfolding radiator panels to maximize the surface area. You don't need fans. You don't need pumps. You don't need cooling towers. The physics of the vacuum does all the work for you.
That really drives home the jailbreak feeling. The engineer in Europe is fighting the very substance of the planet's atmosphere and water. In orbit, the fight is just over.
The constraints are gone.
And you mentioned water. I saw some staggering figures about how much water these terrestrial data centers consume.
Oh, it's becoming a major crisis, especially in arid regions. We're talking trillions of liters globally. A single large data center can use as much water for evaporative cooling as a small city uses for everything. You have this direct competition now in places like Arizona, where you have data centers literally competing with farmers for water rights.
And the regulators are getting involved, like with the trout stream my contact mentioned.
Because the trout stream needs the cold water. So moving this whole industry into orbit, it isn't just about making the AI faster. It's about letting the planet breathe. It decouples the growth of intelligence from the health of the biosphere.
Okay, so the physics is sound, the vacuum solves the heat problem, but the giant asterisk on all space stuff has always been the cost of getting there. I mean, it used to be tens of thousands of dollars to put a single kilogram in orbit, right?
In the shuttle era, it was astronomical. It made any kind of large-scale orbital industry a complete fantasy. But this is where the second pressure point, the Starship Economics, just changes the entire game. It stops being a physics problem and becomes a spreadsheet problem.
And the numbers on that spreadsheet are kind of unbelievable. I was looking at the orbital ascent paper and I had to double check their math.
The projection for Starship version 3 is a capacity of around 200 metric tons to low Earth orbit.
200 tons. Okay, that's a hard number to visualize.
A big SUV is about 2 tons. So you're launching 100 SUVs worth of mass in one go.
100 SUVs.
But instead of cars, you're packing it with hyperdense compute racks designed for the vacuum. The paper breaks down what they call the packaging density.
Right. How many FLOPS per kilogram?
Exactly.
Right.
Taking into account the chips themselves, think NVIDIA's Blackwell or Google's TPUs, plus the solar panels, the structure, and those crucial radiator panels, they estimate a density of about 1 petaflop of computing power for every 50 kilograms of mass.
1 petaflop per 50 kilos. I mean, a petaflop was a world-class supercomputer just a decade ago. It would have filled a room.
And now it weighs about the same as a golden retriever. You have a 200-ton rocket, that's 200,000 kilograms. Divide that by 50 kilograms per petaflop.
That's 4,000 petaflops.
4,000 petaflops, or 4 exaflops.
4 exaflop, yeah. The world's fastest publicly known supercomputer right now is Frontier at Oak Ridge National Lab. And that's what, 1.5, maybe 2 exaflop PS on a good day?
Yes.
Yeah.
So a single Starship launch could place double, maybe triple, the computing power of the world's current fastest supercomputer into orbit in one flight.
That is genuinely terrifying. The speed of that scaling is just okay. But the cost, you said it's a spreadsheet problem now.
Right. The holy grail number for SpaceX is getting the marginal cost of a Starship launch down to $10 million.
Which for a super heavy lift rocket is just absurdly cheap.
It's revolutionary. But let's assume they hit it. You take that $10 million launch cost and you divide it by the 4,000 petaflop PS you just put into orbit.
Okay, so 10 million divided by 4,000, that's
$2,500.
$2,500 per petaflop.
So the cost to transport a petaflop scale supercomputer into space is $2.5 grand. I mean, I bought a graphics card for my gaming PC last year that cost almost that much, and it's definitely not a petaflop.
And that's just the transport cost. Now compare the total cost to a terrestrial data center. On Earth, to build that petaflop, you have to buy acres of land. You pour thousands of tons of concrete. You build a steel warehouse. You install plumbing, gigantic HVAC systems.
You have to get a power contract from the utility, which can take years.
You need water rights. The capital expenditure, the CapEx, is astronomical, and it's exploding. But in orbit, there's no land to buy, there's no property tax, there's no water bill.
And the power bill is zero.
The power bill is zero. The sun is just there. The source talks about 1.3 gigawatts of power available per square kilometer, completely unfiltered by the atmosphere, no clouds. And if you're in the right orbit, no night.
So you're basically trading the enormous ongoing cost of land, concrete, water, and grid power for the one-time cost of rocket fuel. And we are hitting the crossover point. The analysis is showing that we are at, or very near, the moment where it becomes fundamentally cheaper to build and operate a data center in orbit than it is in Northern Virginia.
My mind is officially blown. Okay, so I want to visualize this. What does it actually look like up there? Because my brain immediately goes to the Death Star, or maybe the International Space Station, right? A big, single, clunky structure. But the Google paper, the one called Towards a Future Space-Based System Design, it paints a very different picture.
Yeah, you have to get the Death Star image out of your head. It's not one giant monolithic object. It's more like a swarm of bees, a flock of starlings. They refer to it as the sun catcher concept in one of the papers. Imagine thousands of individual, relatively small satellites, and they're all flying in a loose formation, maybe within a 1 kilometer radius of each other.
So they aren't physically bolted together into a huge truss.
The moment you start bolting things together, you need a massive, heavy structure to hold it all. It has weight, complexity, and points of failure. If they are free-flying, all you need is station-keeping thrusters and good software.
But how do they function as a single computer? On Earth, if I have 2 server racks, I need a fat fiber optic cable running between them. You can't just drape cables across a kilometer of open space.
You don't use cables, you use light. Free space optics.
Lasers.
High bandwidth lasers. Each satellite has multiple laser communication terminals. They're constantly beaming petabytes of data to their neighbors. It creates this incredibly resilient mesh network. It's a virtual supercomputer woven together from beams of light.
Okay, the engineering challenge there seems immense. I've tried to align a telescope in my backyard. Tricky. You're telling me thousands of satellites moving at 17,000 miles an hour have to keep laser beams perfectly pointed at tiny receivers on their neighbors a kilometer away.
It's an absolutely monumental challenge. The pointing accuracy required is insane. But this is where AI comes in. The Google paper specifically talks about using machine learning for the flight control systems. The swarm is a collective. The satellites are constantly talking, adjusting their relative positions, predicting drift, and actively steering the laser beams. It's not a static structure. It's a living, dynamic system that's constantly correcting itself.
And what happens if one of the units just fails, a micrometeorite hits it, or the chip burns out.
That's the other beautiful part of the swarm architecture. On Earth, if a server melts down, a technician has to physically go into the hot aisle and replace it. In the swarm, if a unit goes dark, the network software just routes around it. The data traffic seamlessly flows to other nodes. The broken satellite can then deorbit and burn up in the atmosphere.
So it's self-healing.
It's self-healing and self-cleaning. You just launch replacements on the next Starship flight to replenish the swarm. It's designed for failure, which makes it incredibly robust.
Okay, you mentioned being in the right orbit is key. Both the Google paper and the NKI analysis were really specific about this dawn-dusk sun-synchronous orbit.
It's an incredibly clever solution to the power problem. If you're in a standard orbit, like over the equator, you spend roughly half your time in Earth's shadow. That's night.
And if you don't have sunlight, you need batteries to keep the lights on.
Exactly. You need massive, heavy batteries. And launching mass is what costs money. You want to launch compute, not batteries.
So what's different about this dawn-dusk orbit?
It's an orbit that's tilted in just the right way so that the satellite is always flying along the terminator line, the line between day and night on the Earth below.
The twilight zone.
You're literally riding the edge of a perpetual sunrise. From the satellite's perspective, the sun is always off to one side. It never sets. So your solar panels are bathed in sunlight 24/7, 365. No batteries needed.
So one side is always hot, always generating power.
And here's the other half of the magic. The other side of the satellite, where you put your radiator panels, is always facing away from the sun, out into the cold dark of deep space.
So you've maximized the temperature differential. You have an eternal source of power on one side and an eternal heat sink on the other.
It's the most thermodynamically efficient orientation you can imagine. It's just elegant.
But there's still the issue of space being a hostile environment. I mean, cosmic rays, solar flares. Aren't modern high-performance chips incredibly sensitive to radiation? Wouldn't a solar storm just brick this entire swarm?
That's the traditional rad-hard or radiation-hardened electronics problem. For decades, space agencies had to use ancient, slow processors that were shielded like a bank vault. You can't run a large language model on a chip from 1998. Well, the Google paper had a fascinating section on this. They took their commercial AI chips, their Trillium TPUs, and they actually blasted them with radiation. They simulated the total dose they would receive over a 5-year mission in that specific sun-synchronous orbit.
And did they melt?
They survived. It turns out that while modern chips are more susceptible to single-event upsets, a cosmic ray flipping a single bit from a 0 to a 1, the architecture is so parallel and the software is so robust, you can build in error correction.
So you don't need a lead shield. You just need smarter code that can spot an error and fix it on the fly.
You design for resilience at the software layer, not just the hardware layer. And that's a complete game changer because it means you can fly the latest, greatest commercial chips. You don't have to wait a decade for a space-rated version.
So we can literally take the most advanced AI chips coming off the factory line at TSMC and load them directly into a Starship.
That's the roadmap.
There was one more concept from the hyperdrive paper that really jumped out at me, this idea of the edge cloud space 3D continuum. It sounded less like an infrastructure plan and more like a philosophy.
It's the software that orchestrates this whole system. It treats the entire planet and the space around it as a single unified computing substrate.
Give me an example.
Okay, so let's say you're an AI researcher and you need to train a massive new foundation model. That's a huge, long-running job that generates an incredible amount of heat. The hyperdrive system would be smart enough to say, okay, this is a heat-intensive, non-latency sensitive job. Let's offload the whole thing to the orbital swarm.
Let it cook in space where the cooling is free.
Right. But now let's say you're a soldier on a battlefield using an AI-powered drone for reconnaissance. You need real-time analysis with almost zero latency. You can't wait for the signal to go to orbit and back.
The lag would get you killed.
So the system would dynamically move the required processing for that task to a local ground station, an edge data center, or maybe even to the specific satellite that is passing directly overhead at that exact moment. It treats physical constraints, heat, latency, power availability as just another set of variables to be optimized, like CPU load or memory usage.
It's completely fluid. The computation flows to wherever the physics is most favorable for the task at hand.
It's a planetary scale operating system.
Okay, so the physics works. The engineering is plausible, if incredibly difficult. The economics are starting to make sense. Which brings us to the third pressure point you mentioned, the politics.
The geopolitical escape velocity.
Because once you move the core of your civilization's intelligence off-planet, you're not just escaping heat and gravity. You're escaping jurisdiction. You're escaping the EU AI Act. You're escaping national firewalls.
This is where we get to the story of the legal consultant. A completely different perspective from the hardware engineer.
Right. This was a story drafting compliance frameworks for the EU AI Act. Very meticulous work defining what constitutes high-risk AI, setting up auditing procedures.
The whole safetyism regulatory apparatus.
Exactly. And she wrote about having this moment of, she called it existential obsolescence. She's sitting in a windowless conference room arguing about the specific wording of a clause, and she suddenly realizes that the very definition of territory is being rewritten 400 kilometers above her head.
The ground is literally shifting out from under her. Or I guess the sky is.
She came up with this term, FLOPS sovereignty. She painted this picture of these swarms of data centers moving at orbital velocities, crossing borders in seconds. She said trying to apply the EU AI Act to them was like trying to catch a cloud with a butterfly net.
Right. Because all terrestrial law is based on jurisdiction. It's based on geography.
She described this gut-wrenching shift in her worldview from a belief in political enforcement to a stark realization of thermodynamic irrelevance. Her regulations, her life's work, were becoming irrelevant not because someone voted against them, but because physics was providing a way to simply bypass them entirely.
Let's really break down the legal mechanics of that. The EU AI Act, like most regulations, works on the principle that if you want to sell your product or service within the EU, you have to play by their rules.
Right. The GDPR model. If you have European users, their data is protected by European law, no matter where your servers are.
But how do they enforce that? They enforce it by finding your European subsidiary, by seizing your physical assets in their territory, by blocking your IP addresses at the national level. They have physical choke points they can squeeze.
But what are the choke points for an orbital data center?
Question: what law even applies in space? The foundational text is the Outer Space Treaty of 1967.
So a document written when computers were the size of rooms and the main concern was putting nuclear weapons in orbit.
It was written for astronauts and ICBMs, not for algorithms. The treaty says that nations are responsible for the objects they launch. So if a U.S. company launches a satellite, the U.S. government is technically responsible for it. But the treaty says nothing about data. That has no concept of algorithmic bias or social scoring or high-risk AI systems.
So you could argue that as long as the satellite doesn't physically crash into someone else's satellite, you're not breaking the treaty.
It's a massive legal gray area. And more importantly, the enforcement is a nightmare. You can't send law enforcement to raid a server farm in orbit. You can't cut its power cable because the sun is its power plant. You can't cut its fiber optic backbone because it communicates with lasers.
It's physically untouchable. This creates what the sources were calling unregulatable jurisdictions.
And this is the core of that conflict between the D-cells and the accelerationists you see playing out online. The D-cells, the people who want to slow down AI development for safety reasons, their entire strategy relies on controlling choke points.
They want to regulate chip manufacturing, control access to large data centers, limit the energy consumption.
And orbital compute makes all of those choke points obsolete. It creates the potential for a truly sovereign AI. An AI that runs on its own power, communicates via its own network to terminals anywhere on the planet, and is owned by a private entity that might not answer to any single government. Who turns that off?
No one. It becomes its own kind of nation state, but one whose sovereignty is based not on land or people, but purely on energy capture and information processing.
That is FLPS sovereignty.
That feels incredibly destabilizing. I mean, you can see why governments would be terrified of this. It undermines the very basis of the nation state.
And we should be clear, we're not endorsing this as a good or bad thing. We're reporting on what the analysis suggests is a coming geopolitical reality. The physics and the economics are making this possible. And because it offers such a profound strategic and economic advantage, the assumption has to be that someone will do it.
If the US and the EU try to ban it, some other country will welcome it. Or a company will just do it themselves and register the assets in a jurisdiction that doesn't care.
It's the flag of convenience model used in international shipping, but applied to the most powerful technology in human history, the Cayman Islands of low Earth orbit.
So we have the physics, the engineering, the economics, and the legal loophole. But where does this path lead? This can't be the end game. And this is where that third perspective comes in, the one that went really far out.
The Kardashev roadmap.
Yeah, the logistics planner. This person's analysis wasn't about the next server rack. It was about the next interplanetary supply chain. And they were obsessed with this paper, Moonshine Revised.
A foundational text in large-scale space industrialization theory.
And for this person, the orbital AI swarm we've been discussing, that was just step one. That was just the brain.
But a brain needs a body. It needs resources. It needs hands.
Exactly. And they argued that once the brain is in orbit, the next logical step isn't to bring its benefits back down to Earth. It's to go further out, to the moon, to the asteroids.
To where the resources are.
This person was talking about a future where the cost to orbit has collapsed so completely that wealth is no longer something we dig out of the ground. It's something we harvest directly from the solar system. Post-scarcity, resource superabundance.
Awful.
It basically means we have so much raw material and so much energy that things like resource wars and poverty become historical footnotes, like problems from a primitive era.
It's the ultimate shift from a closed system economy, which is Earth, to an open system economy, which is the solar system. On Earth, every gain is someone else's loss. It's a zero-sum game. In an open system, you can just go get more.
So walk me through the roadmap. Phase 1 is the orbital compute, the brain. What's phase 2?
Phase 2 is ISRU, in situ resource utilization, using local materials, specifically setting up shop on the moon.
Why the moon first? It's just a big gray rock.
It's a big gray rock that happens to be made of silicon, aluminum, titanium, iron, and oxygen, all the ingredients you need for solar panels, structures, and rocket fuel. And crucially, it has a gravity well that is only 1/6 as deep as Earth's.
Which means it's incredibly cheap, energetically, to launch things from the moon out into the rest of the solar system.
You don't want to be lifting millions of tons of steel and silicon out of Earth's deep gravity well if you can help it. It's like trying to build a ship at the bottom of a canyon. You want to live off the land. You mine the materials on the moon and build what you need in space.
So you send a factory to the moon.
You send a seed factory.
Yeah.
And this is phase 3 of the roadmap, self-replicating robotics.
The von Neumann machine idea.
In principle, yes. You send one robotic factory to the moon. Its first job is to mine lunar regolith to build solar panels to power itself. Its second job is to build another copy of itself.
So you get exponential growth. 2 factories become 4, 4 become 8.
And as the industrial base on the moon grows exponentially, it's building ever larger solar power arrays, robotic miners, and manufacturing plants.
And this creates a feedback loop, right?
A powerful one.
Yeah.
The source called it reinforcing waves of technological progress. The AI in orbit, the brain, gets smarter and more powerful because it has a near-infinite energy supply from lunar-built solar arrays. That smarter AI then designs better, more efficient robots.
And those better robots, the hands on the moon, build bigger and better power systems even faster.
Which in turn feeds more energy back to the AI. The loop closes and the rate of progress itself starts to accelerate.
And this is what allows for what they call the Kardashev leap.
Right. Can you remind everyone what the Kardashev scale is? It's a useful framing device.
It's a way of classifying civilizations based on their energy consumption. A type I civilization is one that can harness all of the energy that falls on its home planet from its star. So for us, that's all the sunlight hitting the Earth.
Which is a colossal amount of energy, something like 10 to the 16th, 10 to the 17th watts.
And where are we today on that scale?
We're at about 10 to the 13th watts. We're not even a type I. We are maybe a type 0.7 civilization. We're still a planetary toddler.
And the sources argue there's a civilizational energy gap. We can't get from 0.7 to 1.0 using just terrestrial resources.
We can't. Not with fossil fuels, obviously, because we'd cook the planet. But probably not even with terrestrial renewables. To get to type I levels with solar panels on the ground, you'd have to pave a continent-sized area. We need that land for forests, for farms, for cities.
So to become a type I civilization, we are forced to go to space. There's no other path.
You have to capture the energy up there before it gets filtered and scattered by the atmosphere.
And once you have that energy in that lunar industrial base, the logistics planner said the next step is the asteroids.
That once you have a permanent economy outside of Earth's gravity well, moving mass around is cheap. You start harvesting near-Earth asteroids for materials that are rare on Earth. Platinum, iridium, nickel, in quantities that are almost unimaginable. Quintillions of tons of raw materials.
Quintillions. It's a number that doesn't mean anything.
At that point, the entire concept of terrestrial mining becomes economically and ethically obsolete. Why would you destroy a rainforest to dig for a few ounces of platinum when you can go grab a rock made of solid platinum that's just floating nearby.
It completely flips the script on sustainability. My whole life, sustainability has meant use less, reduce, reuse, recycle, a mindset of scarcity. But this is a sustainability of abundance. Access the infinite so you can leave the finite, fragile biosphere alone.
It allows the Earth to transition from being a mine and a factory into being a garden, a protected ecological preserve.
It is a truly staggering vision, but I have to be the devil's advocate here. It sounds like a utopia, but what if it goes wrong? You're putting the most powerful intelligence ever created in a place where it can't be unplugged. You're launching thousands, maybe millions of satellites. What about space junk? Kessler syndrome? Couldn't we accidentally trap ourselves on this planet behind an impenetrable wall of our own debris?
These are absolutely the critical risks. The Kessler syndrome risk is real, which is why the swarm architectures are designed with active deorbiting systems. A dead satellite is programmed to fall back and burn up. It has to be self-cleaning. But the other risk, the AGI alignment risk, the Skynet scenario.
That's the heart of the diesel argument, isn't it? If you can't be sure you can control it and you can't unplug it, should you ever turn it on in the first place?
It's the ultimate technological gamble. You are weighing the existential risk of an unaligned superintelligence against what these sources would frame as the certainty of stagnation if we stay planet-bound.
The great stagnation. The theory that progress is slowed because we've run out of new frontiers, we've filled up the map, and when a civilization fills its container, it stops growing and starts fighting over the scraps.
Which leads to calls for degrowth. The argument here is that degrowth isn't a noble choice. It's a symptom of a species that has run out of room, and the only cure is to make the room bigger.
Incredible. We started this whole deep dive with a single glass of melting ice water, a tiny, perfect symbol of our terrestrial limits. Heat, bureaucracy, and we've ended up here with a self-replicating industrial web building a Type I civilization across the solar system. It's a lot to get your head around.
It is arguably the central story of the 21st century.
Something from the epilogue of the source material that just perfectly captures this whole paradigm shift. We tend to think of ourselves, our biological bodies, our nations, our laws as the final, finished product of evolution. We think we're the point of the whole exercise. But maybe we're not. Maybe we're just the bootloader.
The temporary code.
The temporary code needed to initialize the real operating system. And if the destiny of intelligence in this universe is written in silicon and energy, then the moment that first exaflop server rack powers on in the perfect silent cold of orbit, the bootloader has done its job. And the real history of intelligence can finally begin.